I'm delighted to have both of our guests here this night. I think Naomi is going to question a little bit of my judgment because at one time, the last time I scheduled her, I had to change because of a snowstorm on one, and now we get a point where I don't know if it's the Madoff series or the fear of the water, but I'm so delighted that you who have weathered are here. No fiction, movie, no play is filled with more drama than the human family. This powerful dynamic is brought to light in the accounts of our first family in the Bible. Cain and Abel's brotherly love ends in murder. Jacob steals Esau's birthright and then his blessing. Leah, who in fact the Midrash says was Beshert of Esau, sleeps with her sister Rachel's lover, Jacob. Gives him his first 4 sons, while Rachel is childless, teaching us that sibling rivalry knows no gender boundary. What makes the Bible so real, relevant, and powerful is it addresses the reality we see day to day in our lives as family members and members of one human family. Tonight we will look at a part of that fascinating dynamic sibling rivalry in the Bible and in life. We are honored that 2 great minds will challenge us with what they see in the Bible and in our daily lives. Scholars Naomi Harris Rosenblatt and Michael Brody will build on Rabbi Jonathan Sacks' groundbreaking interpretation of the book of Genesis in Not in God's Name, Confronting Religious Violence, and will consider how these ancient stories of the Bible give us insight to human psychology and religious violence. Naomi Rosenblatt is a renowned scholar and writer, Israeli-born psychotherapist. She speaks and teaches Bible classes. She's the author of Wrestling with Angels, What Genesis Teaches Us About Our Spirituality, Identity, Sexuality, and Personal Relationships. She's also the author of After the Apple, Women in the Bible, Timeless Stories on Love, Lust, and Longing, and Bless the Bitter and the Sweet, her newest book, A Sabra Girl's Diary from the Last Days of British Rule and the Rebirth of Israel. Known for insight on women and families in the Bible, she is highly regarded as a voice on how we can use wisdom of the Bible to examine the strengths in our own lives. She coined, I believe, the concept of Genesis as the first family, understanding that studying it, we're actually studying ourselves. Dr. Michael Brody is a psychiatrist in private practice. He teaches at the University of Maryland. He's currently the chair of the Media Committee of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and the Celebrity Section of the Popular Culture Association. Dr. Brody is widely published on the impact of psychology on popular culture and is the co-author of Messages, Self-Help Through Popular Culture. He has written other books and many academic papers. Dr. Brody captivates audiences with clips of popular TV shows to reveal the powerful messages we receive from media. He challenges us often to understand how the inside may be driven as well by what is on the outside. He has testified at congressional hearings and keynoted symposiums on the power of modern culture on our psyche and our life. He will also guarantee, I am sure, that we will conclude before Maryland and Nebraska tips off this evening.
That's a football?
So we're going to begin this evening. I invite Naomi Rosenblatt first to begin. She will speak for a while, and then we'll call on Dr. Brody, and then we will open it up for a little bit of chat between us all. Naomi?
Yes, sir. Now, what would you like me to do with this?
I think this will pick you up, and it'll be easy. You can just talk. You can put this here. Is that good?
Beautiful. When we walked in, I already told Dr. Brody that I've got sibling. When we walked in, is that better? I already shared with Dr. Brody that I'd like an appointment because we have a lot of problems with sibling rivalry in my immediate family. So whatever I can learn from him, I would really appreciate. I also want to thank you for coming on this miserable evening to come and be together here this evening. The basketball, I guess you're going to miss, that I'm not missing. And also some CNN, again, with Hillary, with Bernie, and that whole group. We're talking today about sibling rivalry. One of the things that I quickly want to share with you before we get into any discussion of the biblical narrative is the biblical point of view that God, in his love and trust of the creatures that he created, gave us the gift of free will. That's ultimately what distinguishes us from the cockroach, from the rhinoceros, the snake, from any other animal. Free will and our responsibility for the consequences. What do I mean by that? That once you acknowledge that free will plays such a role in human relationships and decisions, you realize that life is pretty messy. And I want to convey that. Now, once you believe in that, no human being can be perfect because free will mixes things up, messes them up. That's where we're free to enjoy the biblical narrative and realize that the authors who wrote down the stories that we're going to discuss were free. In fact, it was their point of view, their Weltanschauung, that they couldn't discuss any of these people, no matter how famous they are in our history, without giving the pros and the cons and all the different aspects. The way the narrative is written is part of who we are. We'll start now immediately with the idea of sibling rivalry. There's no question that the biblical narrative makes it clear, without explanations or justifications, that the first couple, the little couple that escaped from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, and were very happy to get out, to be free. They love each other, they make love, and they make two boys, Cain and Abel. No sooner these two boys are out in the open, one is terribly jealous of the other, seeing that God, according to his interpretation, prefers his brother over himself. The result is that he plans to murder the brother that he says as benefiting from his close relationship with God. What's so interesting in this story, and that's what Rabbi Sachs, Lord Sachs, obviously a good man, is trying to look, how can we reduce biblical rivalry that brings about the religious wars all throughout history and today? Well, one of the things that you already see in that ancient story of Cain and Abel, God sees that one of the brothers is jealous and angry with the other. It's not rational. It might have started for reasons, but it's so deep. And he warns him in one of the most famous lines, and in Hebrew it's beautiful, I imagine in English too. He says to him, look, I can see that you're very angry. In other words, he's acknowledging what is happening. But sin is crouching at the door, rovetz, like a cat. Sin is crouching at the door, ready to pounce. You, in a sense, have to acknowledge the fact that you're so angry, so enraged, but because you're a human being, and coming back to my original idea, because you've got free will, it's your obligation to realize it, acknowledge it, and control it. Wrestle with it. So already we've got the beginning that, yes, we acknowledge reality, but then it's our responsibility to deal with it. We move from that myth, which establishes the first fraternal fratricide in the biblical narrative, and we move to Abraham and Sarah. And that's our first couple on the stage of history. They get along very well. They're never mentioned one without the other. And Abraham is a man of vision. He's following a new calling, a radical idea, so radical it's so difficult to teach it. She with him is as committed, Sarah. And one of the things that God says to him, go and follow this message, do as I suggest, go to the country that I'm pointing you to, and you will have as many children as the stars in heaven. And all throughout Genesis, children, the begetting of children is always about the future, about hope, about what will be. In a sense, there's no point following this new message unless there is somebody to transmit it to for the future. And here where children are so important. Anyway, years go by, and God keeps coming back to him, reassuring him, there will be children, there will be children. In the meantime, Sarah is with him. She's a partner in this new calling. She walks literally shoulder next to shoulder. And she takes on the terrible responsibility that she has not conceived. And most women know the misery of waiting for getting pregnant and how long it takes and all the suffering that's involved. And up to very recently, women took the responsibility for infertility. So she's terribly bothered by it. It upsets her, worried about her husband who's not getting this prophecy fulfilled. And she takes life into her own hands, and she goes looking for a surrogate mother. According to the law of the day, Mesopotamian law, a surrogate mother, the concubine, who will sleep with the husband, produce the child belongs to the family, not to the woman who gave birth to the child. And all the problems that we have today with surrogate motherhood are right there. You don't have to read any magazine. Just go back to the book of Genesis. It's all in there. And she finds Hagar, sort of Zaftik, I imagine, sort of Egyptian milkmaid, Hagar, and she brings him to the tent, and she brings her to Abraham, and in other words, get together and produce a child. What's amazing about that Abraham, and I really love him, he's such a gentleman, never in all the years of infertility, and you know what's going on today. I mean, you see Afghanistan, Pakistan, the sheiks, there are as many wives as necessary. He never once says to her that maybe they should bring in somebody else who'll help produce a child, because that's what the emphasis. It's all about hope and the future. No different than the Israeli anthem, right? Hatikva. It's always about the future, always with a vision to what you're becoming and working towards. Anyway, Hagar comes, and she's young and I guess unsophisticated, and she starts an intimate relationship with our patriarch Abraham. And I imagine in those days they shared a tent, that it wasn't like the Four Seasons Hotel. There was no privacy. So Abraham and Hagar is here. Our poor Sarah is right here. And she's nuts about Abraham, nuts about him. But she's also an older woman who's had a pretty tough life, schlepping all the way from Iraq of today down to the Promised Land with the camels, with the noise, the heat, and everything that went on. So she is suffering with this Hagar, and her husband getting maybe closer to Hagar, you never know. In the meantime, they have a child, and this is Ishmael. And in Hebrew, Ishmael means God listened to me. Sarah cannot take it. The jealousy just eats her up. And you fully identify with her. At least I do. And the jealousy being so upset. And maybe Abraham was getting close to Hagar. You don't know. I mean, they're together all the time. So she can't stand it. And at a certain point, she takes Hagar, the concubine, and banishes her into the desert with Ishmael. No shade, no water, terribly hot. And again, this Bible, after all, Hagar is a concubine. She's not the important one in the story. But all your sympathy goes to Sarah the way it's described. And our Rabbi Sachs, Lord Sachs, likes it. He's pointing out what great compassion we have for Hagar. The rabbi is compassionate for Hagar. And all these men, not once say, well, they understand Sarah and her misery, which she's going through, all in order to save the future for this new calling, this new commitment. So the rabbis brought in interpretations, and Lord Sachs is all upset that really Sarah seemed to have behaved so terribly. And God keeps saying to Sarah and to Abraham that it's Sarah who's going to have the next child, and that's going to be the next patriarch. In the meantime, our Abraham obviously is getting close to Ishmael, very fond of him, would like him to be the next patriarch, to get the blessing of where this group is going towards. God goes back and back. No, it's Sarah's son. If you want to be a feminist today and look at the story from yet another angle, one of the points that you could conclude, yes, you brought in Hagar, Abraham is getting close to her, maybe he should be, Ishmael should be the one who's the first son, the carrier of the legacy to the future. But really what it's saying, you can't rent a woman's womb and make that work. It's Sarah, the mother, who's important in this story. You can't just rent, as I say, I'm repeating myself, a womb and produce the leader for the next generation. And what God is trying maybe to teach us, that it's not just a child, it's not a matter of biology, and everywhere over the world people are having babies, in yurts in Mongolia, somewhere in Eskimo land, people are having babies. It's how you bring up the child, what that child stands for, what is the content of that child, that's what's important. And Sarah is well aware of what has to be transmitted to her son to carry on this legacy into the future. Not anybody could do it. However, and that's what, again, Lord Sachs is very, and he's right, never is Ishmael rejected. He's never, never, never rejected. And all of us who have children know that inevitably there are different relationships with the different children. You might like one is going to be a pianist, the other one may be a basketball player. Among your friends, you've got different quality of relationships, and there's a certain equality. But still, you choose a husband, right? I happen to be married. You choose a husband. For me, that happens to be the right husband. That doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of other men that are lovely and intelligent and good companions, but they're not husband material for me, Naomi. So in all these cases, we make choices, and that doesn't mean that the other are rejected. So the main point of Lord Sachs is that nobody is rejected in these sibling rivalries from a historical religious point of view, but everyone has his own destiny. So we've got Isaac is born, and again Sarah cannot stand when Ishmael is running around and having a good time. Again, some of the problems of blended marriages of today. And again Hagar is chased out into the desert. But God is very affectionate, compassionate, loving, merciful to Hagar. And it's one of the few places in the whole of biblical narrative where you don't know about people's feelings, that you hear Hagar being so worried about her child with this blazing heat. She finds a bush, she puts him there, and it's a famous line in Hebrew. She moves far enough so that if the boy cries because he's thirsty and it's hot and he might get so uncomfortable, she will not hear him crying. It's too difficult, it's too hard, and it's beautifully described. So as the tell me if I'm overgoing the time. So as the narrative continues, our Sarah gets all the blame. She's the bad one. She pushed away the other woman. And Hagar, everybody's feeling sorry for. Anyway, at least we don't have to be guilty as Jews that we pushed away Hagar, because Ishmael gets a lot of blessings from God. In the meantime, we know they all got the oil. In the meantime, our history has been pretty difficult. It wasn't a bowl of cherries all along. So, when people get so upset about that Hagar was so mean with, with Hagar, that Sarah with Hagar, I understand Sarah completely. I feel tremendous compassion towards her. And Hagar, turns out, she goes back to Egypt later on. Ishmael marries a young woman. He's got children. And his life turns out quite well. And that's what Lord Sachs is very worried about to explain. Now, one of the things that in all these stories not so much prophecy, but the point of view that the older one of the brothers will always end up serving the younger one. That's the theme that runs throughout these stories. Now, what does Christianity do with Paul? He's one of the early Christians. He takes the theme that the younger one, the older one will serve the younger one, and not going into all the details of the story, he reinterprets the relationship of early Christianity with Judaism, a very delicate period in our history. We were always a small people, we are still a small people. So all these decisions are heavy and important. And so as a result of that, he says, we, the Christianity, we're the younger religion. The Hebrew Bible, they're the older brother, so to speak, and eventually their importance will be overcome. I mean, they're not so important. We're the new ones. We see the future. We're the younger brother. We're the younger brother, which will, no, I'm mixing it up. We're the younger brother, and the older ones, namely the Abraham and his group, will end up serving us. Our story will overcome these stories of the original founding fathers and mothers. So we go on from Isaac and Sarah and Abraham, and we move towards the very important story of Jacob and his two wives, and Esau, and what happens there. Now, Lord Sachs is very, very involved in that story, and his interpretations are important. I'm not as generous to the way things are interpreted in the rabbi's mind. He obviously wants to bring peace in the world, and he wants to reduce the number of wars between the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians after the Crusaders, who really, there was blood flowing in the streets. Jewish communities were annihilated, burned, forced to convert. So that's 11th century coming towards here. But today we've got Islam. And again, he's trying to show through the story of the primal rivalry between Jacob and Esau that ultimately nobody is rejected. Even though Jacob is the one that God chooses to be the next one to go on in history and carry the Jewish legacy, Esau is taken care of. And he too has a good history, but a different destiny. And there's no rejection here. He's constantly repeating the fact that some are chosen, but not necessarily for an easy life. It all depends what you're chosen for, but they have a purpose. The other one in this sibling rivalry is not rejected. He has his own place. When we come to Rebecca, like all the women in the Hebrew Bible, she's practical. She's very concerned with her children. She's even aggressive about it and moves fast to do whatever she needs. There's a crisis. What's the crisis? Again, that Bible tells you like it is. And I always say, those who can't take the heat should not read the Hebrew Bible, because you get it all laid out. There are no fairy tales, no makeup, no hiding of anything. You, the reader, in a way, are getting the compliment that everything is shared with you. Nothing is hidden. The Bible relies that you will take out the right interpretation, and we'll learn from it. So Rebecca, we're told, Rebecca loves Jacob. That's a fact. And her husband Isaac loves Esau, and that's a fact. So already you've got the beginning of a terrible conflict. And Isaac is getting older, maybe a spot of dementia, he doesn't see so well, and he bonds with Esau the way fathers today about basketball or football or whatever. That goes on for hours on end. They're bonding around that. And she, Rebecca, and we can one day talk about her marriage, it's also interesting. She, Rebecca, loves Jacob. And Jacob loves his mother, Rebecca. So he's always hanging around her skirts with the women in the kitchen, busy cooking. And Esau is out hunting. And Isaac, the father, loves Esau. He's macho, he's male. He comes back from the hunting and he brings Isaac venison to eat. So Rebekah, who's always listening to what's happening in the house, hears Isaac telling his son Esau, look, why don't you go out and bring some venison from the hunt, and I will bless you. Now, blessing in those days is not like a lawyer writing a will. A blessing from a father to the next generation cannot be simply abrogated. It's very important. She hears this, and she wants her Jacob to be the one to get to inherit the legacy and Abraham's blessing. But what can we do? He's the younger one. Esau is the older one. But nothing stops our Rebekah. Nothing stops our Rebekah. And she also had been told, and I don't want to go to all the details, that she's got 2 children in her womb, and already her pregnancy is terribly difficult. So already sibling rivalry starts in the womb. The Bible is so connected to that. And we're told already that the older one will serve the younger one. When she hears Isaac, her husband, doing this thing with Esau, that he'll come back and get the blessing, she takes Jacob and she doesn't let him even give his opinion about what's going to happen. And she covers his arms with fur so he feels like Esau, always coming in from the hunt, and the smell of the fields from these furry sleeves. And he says to her, what if my father finds out that I've deceived him? It's a terrible thing to deceive your father. And she says to him, just do as I tell you. In other words, stop asking questions. Just do, and you can see her like in Portnoy's complaint, the mother, pushing to do that he should do what she tells him and not to argue back. Okay, he goes in. And you know, if any of you here are teachers of kindergarten or teenagers, the scene that follows is pure theater, because there's a story on the stage and also the audience sitting at on their chairs wondering what is happening, how is this going to develop. So Jacob comes in with all the furs and everything, comes up to his father Isaac, and he says, Father, please the blessing that he's Esau. But here again that Bible, and that's what Lord Sachs is very happy about, you get this undercurrent that Isaac, we're not sure, does he know this is Esau? Or that it's Jacob? What's really going in? There's always this undercurrent, just like the undercurrent with Abraham and Sarah, because Abraham is always upset that his son Ishmael is not being treated well, but he goes along with Sarah and with God. So Isaac says to Jacob, come closer. He's suspicious. So Jacob comes closer. He smells his fur. And he says, yes, it feels like Esau, but it's the voice of Jacob. Then again, and he's more begging for the blessing that Abraham originally got from God. And again, Isaac is suspicious. 4 times he's suspicious that this is not Esau, that this somebody is misleading him. Then you can come in from the side and interpret and say, well, Isaac is not a fool. Maybe Isaac, deep in his heart, knew that Esau, who's a hunter, physical, quick to anger, problems with self-control, that he's not really the best type to lead the Jewish people for the next thousands of years with all that entails. And that he really, deep in his heart, wants Jacob to be the one and is delighted, like in many marriages, that it's Rebekah who does the emotional work. She brings Isaac, she covers him, she fibs, she does all of that. And Isaac sort of is lying there on the bed. So in the end, he accepts that this indeed is Esau, even though you're not sure that deep in his heart he thinks so. And you, the audience, are wondering, is he going to discover, isn't he? Eventually, he gives Jacob the blessing that was supposed to go to Esau. So he leaves the room, the tent, and again, the height of drama. At that moment, Esau has run back from the fields. He's sweating. He's like those dogs, with the saliva hanging down. He's just come from killing and bringing in a lot of food, and he comes up to Isaac. oh, this is so tragic. And he says to Isaac, here I am, my father. You feel the affection. The affection just comes through these pages after thousands of years. He says, my father, here I am. I'm waiting for a blessing. And our Isaac starts trembling. And he's an old man. I mean, he's lying down because each of them say, Father, sit up. So I guess he really was. You get all the details. And he says to him, he's waiting for the blessing. And Isaac, trembling, said to him, somebody came here and already has this blessing. And this isn't the blessing cheaper by the dozen. I mean, it's not a lithograph. The blessing is the blessing is the blessing. And Esau gives out a cri de coeur, a yell that really reverberates throughout history. You can't even listen to it without crying. And he's weeping, and he says, Father, but don't you have one blessing left for me? Don't you have one blessing left for me? And you can hardly finish reading it. It's so upsetting. And all this in this story. And then Isaac gives him a blessing, and his life also isn't terrible. He's also settled with children and lots of wives and cattle and all the goodies of those days. And he swears he's going to murder Jacob if he only gets his hand on this deceiver who deceived the father, deceived him. And Rebecca, she's still there because she's always worried about her Jacob. And she comes up to him and she says, look, Esau is going to kill you. He's so angry. I want you to go off to Mesopotamia, or Iraq as they call it, Iraq of today. Go to my family and they'll find you the right bride and so forth. So that's what happens. Esau gets his blessing and marches off. Okay? You tell me.
I think very
short enough now, yeah. Right, so very quickly. Then I'll quickly jump to the most important episode in the life of Jacob, and that's the wrestling with the angel. He's gone through very long years, but in the meantime he's got two wives, Leah and Rachel, and they have rivalry between them. I mean, I want the psychoanalyst to explain why we can never settle things without rivalry. It's always rivalry. And they're getting close to coming back to the promised land, to Canaan, to take on the mantle of the leadership of the next generation of the Jewish people. As he's crossing the river, Yabok, to get into Canaan, he starts imagining that he is wrestling with either Esau in his imagination or God or some of the evil that he's done. His conscience bothers him. Anyway, there's fighting, and in the end, the angel, we think, is ready to leave the scene. And Jacob, by then already a man with family, property, with a lot more self-confidence, he holds on to the angel, or we think it's an angel, and won't let him go till you bless me. In other words, he's looking for a blessing that he will get without fibbing, without misleading, without being so dishonest. And the blessing that he gets, and then we'll say goodbye, and the blessing that Jacob gets is the angel changes his name. In those days, when you arrived at some other stage of life, you got a different name. He's called Israel, which really ties in with the Hebrew verb of wrestling. And he says, Sarita, you wrestled with God, you wrestled with man, and you have overcome and you have prevailed. And so the angel disappeared. Jacob has gotten, in a sense, his identity, who he is, what he is, all of that has come together. He's a calmer man. And just to bring our Lord Sachs one more minute, because he's so worried about them getting along, in order to teach the people of today not to fight, in the end, I'll shorten it, Jacob and Esau meet, they fall on each other's neck, they kiss, but rabbinical interpretation said they're not sure if Esau didn't bite him a little bit. I mean, that's totally unnecessary. There's nothing about biting in the episode. But they hug and they kiss and they sort of acknowledge each other, and then each brother goes his own way.
So I will just tell you on that one little what Carl and Michael is that they come up and there is the poet Tek Carmi who says that when they got together like that, it's lihitrapek, right?
Yeah.
To snuggle.
Yeah.
But change a word, one letter, lihifarech, to break apart.
Oh.
It's a nice midrash.
Yeah. But the book is written in a way that's begging you to interpret it in as many
Absolutely.
ways as
All right, boss, you're
you can.
on.
Do it 70 different ways.
Okay.
I'll give you this, and you can we'll put it up on here. He's tethered.
I'm tethered. So, in the last James Bond movie, Spectre, James Bond, 007, is shaken, stirred, chased, shot at, tortured, his friends are killed, and at the very end of the movie, we find out why the head of Spectre, Emilio Blofeld, is so angry with 007. It seems that James was an orphan, and he was brought into Emil Blofeld's home as an extra sibling. Sibling rivalry. Now, popular culture is filled with sibling rivalry. On the Waterfront, Toy Story, Death of a Salesman, the presidential debates, it's all sibling rivalry. Now, it's not as poetic as these wonderful stories that are in the Bible that Rabbi Sachs speaks of and that Naomi just described and analyzed beautifully, nor they are as deadly as my experiences in the early 70s when I got to evaluate every child here in the District of Columbia that murdered another child below the age of 13. And invariably, it was the same story. The mother took in infants for daycare and was somehow left alone with one of her own children who either drowned or burned the baby. Very deadly. Now, this is certainly not as extreme as when my younger son, who's here, was born, and his baby nurse was leaving, and his older brother said to the baby nurse, his older son was 3 years old, and she had her valises, and she was about to leave the townhouse that we lived in at the time. My older son said to the baby nurse, "Didn't you forget something?" Now, rivalry comes from the Latin meaning using the same stream. And as a result of medical miracles like IVF, that stream has gotten much narrower because of multiple births. Now, sibling rivalry doesn't only mean the competition for possessions, money, and attention. There has to be some type of internal payoff to either beat, humiliate, or hurt your sibling. Alan, this is not only in sports. This is my younger brother here. Sibling rivalry also has a lot to do not only with brothers and sisters in one's own family, but people outside of our families who we make sibling substitutes, such as colleagues, friends, people that we're married to, okay? There's always competition or lack of it in terms of comparing golf scores, salaries, and chores. Through the whole life cycle, sibling rivalry exists, where there's competition based on sexual attractiveness, achievement, and personal relationships. And even as we get older, the phrase stops with, "He broke my Barbie," to, "I took Mom to the doctor twice now. Now it's your turn." Now, in the late 1920s and early 1930s, one of the first American child psychiatrists, David Levy, did these experiments that would never be permitted today on children, okay? He took kids out of a child guidance center for one session. All of these children had just had a younger sibling. And he did what was called structured play. He had the kid come into a room, and on the table was a big doll with a little baby on the doll, apparently nursing on the big doll, and then there was a medium-sized doll. And he explained to the child the fact that this was a mother feeding the baby and this was a baby sister or brother watching. Why don't you tell me now what's happening? There was action. First, very verbal. The kid saying, that's a bad baby. That's a bad mother. And then there was actual physical action of grabbing the baby off of the mother doll, throwing the baby on the floor, replacing the brother or sister older doll on top of the mother. And then, of course, there was undoing. The kid must have felt bad, and he started to try to reconstruct the scene, and he started blaming the fact that this was a bad baby, this was a rotten baby, you, the examiner, made me do this, and so forth and so on. Now, what was so shocking and so vivid was this amount of hostility. But this psychiatrist did a terrific job in terms of documenting this and validating the issue of sibling rivalry. Now, for me, in the early 70s, I was able to verify this very easily, as maybe some of you did. I don't know if any of you had children at the JCC in the nursery school. One of the things that they had for all us helicopter parents was a one-way mirror. And you stand in front of the mirror, and I would see my older son, he was like 3 or 4 years old at the time, and several of his colleagues, and they would take the baby doll and put it in the oven. And they would take the baby doll out of the oven. Then they would put the baby doll in the oven. And, of course, I had to validate it as a scientist to say to the nursery school teacher, what's up with this? She says, oh, all those kids just had younger siblings born. Now, while I'm saying this about siblings and the rivalry that Naomi spoke about, certainly the worst one with Cain and Abel, there's very good things about having siblings. Very good things, Alan. There are good things having siblings. You're not as lonely. You share an amazing type of continuity and history. You get the advantage of having some responsibility for somebody younger than you. You learn about the whole thing of physical contact. I'm talking about getting punched. For some of us, it makes us feel alive. It feels that somebody's paying attention to us. Any type of aggression, you learn to modify it. You learn to compromise. You learn to be flexible as a result of having siblings. When you go out into the world, you definitely get to know about how to handle aggression. You learn about loyalty through mutual caregiving. You learn about loyalty within the family and with your siblings. Also, with your siblings, you get to share the burden of expectations that your parents have of you. It's diluted out. It also helps in terms of the burden that you may have to do certain chores, not just chores like taking out the garbage or going to get milk. It has to do with chores about, handling various aspects of your parents' emotional life. As an older sibling, if you have an older sibling, sometimes they're the pioneer. They're the person who works out the idea that they should drive at 16 or they should be allowed to stay out past their curfew. So siblings could be very positive. But for a 3-year-old who's close with their mother, to be dethroned, I'll use that term, it's quite a trauma. And kids at 3 years old know that there's something up when their mother is pregnant. Because one of the two biggest mysteries to a 3- and 4-year-old is where do babies come from and how do you die? Those are questions that 3- and 4-year-olds are very curious about. But they do know that the baby's coming and they ask the questions. Could we get a boy or a girl? Do we have a choice? Where is the baby coming from? Is the baby going to bring toys? The parents who want to be very inclusive sometimes ask the younger child, is this a nice rattle? Do you like where we're putting the crib? this works out until the baby actually arrives. So after all this waiting, what a bummer. Who is this kid? The kid doesn't talk. I can't play with the kid. All he does is cry, and all mom does is spend her time feeding this child. I am very, very disappointed. I am also getting yelled at a lot because I seem to be having a lot of accidents with my PPs, and I seem to be talking funny. My mom keeps using the word stuttering. I'm stuttering. She says that I'm trying to get attention that the baby's getting. And all I'm feeling is very wet. Now, in addition to regression that occurs when a sibling, a new baby or girl come into the world for a child, for an older child, with the regression, again, could be facial tics, it could be stuttering, it could be accidents, bathroom accidents, and so forth. The other thing that happens that occurs and occurs throughout the whole life cycle is the shaping of one's identity, the other children's identity. Now, Rabbi Sachs speaks a great deal about tribal identity and group identity, the whole idea of identity. Now, to me, identity is a pre-conscious feeling. Now, what I mean by pre-conscious is like the multiplication table. We know what 9 times 3 is, right? 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 27. But we don't walk around thinking all the time that 9 times 3, I hope we don't, is 27. We don't keep going the multiplication table in our mind all the time. So identity, whether it's our race, our gender, our religion, our talents, the defense mechanisms we use, the sublimations that we use later in life, the work that we do, the partner that we have as a spouse, and even our birth order. These all become part of our identity. Now, birth order. There's been a lot of work done on birth order in relation to siblings and sibling rivalry. It is pointed out, and there's a whole current literature about its relation to personality. Older children seem to achieve more. They tend to be more conservative and more conforming. Younger children and latter-borns are more rebellious. It's often said if they could just stay out of jail, they're fine in the family, the latter-borns, okay? The older-borns have to achieve. Now, there's a very well-known book with great studies in it called Born to Rebel by Frank Sulloway. And what he does is he puts this in a historical perspective. For example, one of the things that he shows is that Copernicus's theory about us revolving around the sun and Darwin's theory was very well accepted by latter-born scientists of the day. The older scientists, the firstborns, rejected all of this. Even more interesting was his take on the French Revolution. Apparently, to be part of the French Revolution, to be part of the National Convention, one had to sign in with their birth date, the number of siblings, the birth dates of their siblings. So he put all of this data together, and he found that the French Revolution, in many ways, was by most of the people were latter-born children. They were the youngest children. They started the French Revolution. However, the Reign of Terror, when they were cutting off everybody's head and killing everybody, these were all firstborns. Because firstborns are ruthless. They want to maintain the status quo. Now, as important as this is, birth order to both sibling rivalry and the construct of identity, nothing is more important than the trajectory of what happens than the parents. Now, as parents, one of the great things about being a parent is we get mulligans. We get do-overs. We get do-overs with our children. The various narcissistic injuries that we suffered when we were children, we want our kids to make up for it. We want one of the kids or two of the kids to be the star in the theater, to be the point guard, to be the scholar. Okay? This is what we want. And those kids that could do this, in some ways, become, because of their appeal, because of their talents, because of their gender, even because of their birth order, increase their value to us. This is very, very important, that they increase their value to us. Unfortunately, this brings up the terrible injustice of favoritism. And we begin to hear from our kids those dreaded words, "You're unfair. You're being unfair." And that's the way the whining goes. You're being unfair. You favor him or you favor her. And of course, out of this grows the roots of jealousy and envy. And you hear, or I hear, you're some psychiatrist, right? Now, a few stories, just a couple of stories. M is the middle child of 3. It's her bat mitzvah. This is her special day. Her sister, F, has decided that at her younger sister's bat mitzvah, she's going to have her band play and she's going to sing. M does not want any part of this. This is her day. F carries on with the parents, and the parents relent. M is devastated. But a positive comes about this in treatment. M, who always wanted to be F, what Rabbi Sachs calls mimetic desire, realizes her sister's selfishness and her parents' weakness. She will begin to be herself and not someone else. Second story. He's the oldest of 3 sons, sick as a child. He was displaced by his middle brother as a top advisor to his father. He was so weak that he was unable to even hold a gun and fire while his father, during an attempted assassination on his father. When he's further displaced by his younger brother, he turns to his family's competitors with tragic results. After almost getting his brother's family killed and eventually leading to his own murder. I'm speaking of Fredo in Francis Ford Coppola's masterpiece, The Godfather. It's the displacement narrative and revenge of the rejected that Rabbi Sachs speaks of in the story of Isaac and Ishmael. El had 3 sisters, all younger. His father left the family when he was 8. Because the mother had to work long hours at 2 jobs to keep the family afloat, the kids were often left alone. They relied on each other, forming the strongest of bonds. As they grew up, El, who was 3 years older than his younger sister, assumed the role of key advisor to his mom, who constantly preached the mantra of family, family, family. His business success as an adult enhanced his role as head of the family. The sisters, through ill health, poor financial decisions, and bad luck, continued to rely on the older brother. Trying to support 4 families and an ailing mother became too much of a burden, as did the constant fighting with a wife that was never accepted by his own family. Unfortunately, his guilt as a survivor made him choose his sisters. He couldn't desert them like his father did, not seeing that he was really duplicating his dad by essentially abandoning his own wife and children. There's no fairness. Parents are the power. They decide not only the allocation of resources, including attention to each child, but the family's belief system. He's the oldest. Listen to him. The boys have to go to college. You could get married. Help your sisters. You have so much. Guilt is a first cousin of sibling rivalry. As parents, we rely on our own childhoods to monitor and dispense recognition, love, and status. Some parents don't understand that the conflicts that siblings have should be settled by the siblings. They enter into it, they pass the boundaries, and they make it worse. Some parents actually provoke an increase in the rivalry by comparing and testing and fostering an exploitation of one or both of the children. Unfortunately, the justice that existed or didn't exist in our own family of origin now plays out with our children. Now, unlike Rabbi Sachs's optimistic view, and what Naomi said at the beginning, as shown in the Bible, that we all have a choice, free will, I believe that the mixed feelings we have about our own children are the product of psychodynamic processes built into our own individual childhoods. Now, sibling rivalry is natural, but it's not inevitably extreme. Therefore, I offer some solutions. In terms of older children, I'm talking about 3- and 4-year-olds when a baby is born, they should be allowed to regress. However, it's very inappropriate for a 7- or 8-year-old to begin nursing with their mother. It's very inappropriate for a 7- and 8-year-old to start crawling into bed with their parents. I also feel kids shouldn't be criticized for feeling, or they shouldn't be made to feel guilty because of the negative feelings that they have for a new sibling. And please, as parents, don't take the older kid who's 3 and 4 years old and put him and show him in the carriage and say, "Isn't she cute? Isn't she adorable?" The kid may not exactly feel that way. Certainly giving the kid extra privileges, spending time alone, letting him participate in helping with the baby is a wonderful thing. I'm talking about handing the mother some talcum powder or a diaper. I'm not talking about a 3-year-old giving an infant a bath. Okay? Now, in terms of the younger children, they should develop their own interest, and a parent should help them develop their own interest. They shouldn't be made clones of the older child. One of the things that I know that we've experienced, my wife Shelley and I've seen with other people, has to do with the baby books. Okay? The first child in the baby book, everything is documented, okay? It's like what I said about the French Revolution. Everything is put down. The second child is a couple of things. The third child, he may get his first name in the baby book, okay? Now for us sitting here as adults, Rabbi Sachs goes to great length to help us understand the destructive nature of dualism as a source of conflict and violence with religions. All good and light, or all bad and dark, can also be applied, unfortunately, to individuals. We must appreciate that people in our family are more complicated than either or. As to our feelings for them, we must accept ambivalence, which would help in our capacity for sustaining wounds to avoid alienation. I remember the movie Avalon. How many of you have seen this movie, Avalon? There's a very important scene where these brothers are so close and they come for Thanksgiving and they didn't wait for the brother. You cut the turkey. And that was the family just dissolved with that. But perhaps Rabbi Sachs's most helpful insight to lessen sibling rivalry is the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel before his encounter with Esau. I believe it is really himself, Jacob, who he's fighting with, and he appears to have won. He has freed himself for the need of power and wealth, the need to be Esau, the older child. He is whole. He doesn't need a blessing, a birthright, or anything else. He even offers his possessions to Esau on the following day. If one fights with themselves, struggles, evolves, and reaches even close to that level of peace and satisfaction with a true self, there is no need to be jealous, envious, or hostile with siblings or sibling substitutes. hopefully, like Jacob, you can now say, I have everything. Thank you.
Keep that on and take it, because we're gonna sit and
Okay.
and then I'll give it to Naomi.
Okay.
You now understand why I've been looking forward to this evening for so long, because these are two wonderful minds,
Does your son
and
agree with
approach things in this way. And we're going to give a chance for, I think, Maria, we have questions, but we're very Jewish here. We write down our questions, and we'll do that. But I want to end where both of you got to, and there's two different scenes that we've left to, and Michael, you took that last piece is to me it's this amazing thing that Sachs is talking about, that sense of identity and the wholeness, and and Naomi knows for sure that the word shalom for peace is also comes from wholeness and completeness, and I think you alluded to this as well. And when we look at what Sachs tries to apply, we've looked at the biblical, we've looked at what goes on in our daily lives. How do we extrapolate some of that into what we see in terms of what is going on societal towards or globally with world religion? And we alluded to this in a sense because successionist, we in fact, I often go to these meetings and times and I'm told, oh, it's in the Old Testament, the older brother, the Old Testament. And, and Islam says, we accept both of our elements, but this is something that comes through. And as part of our identity, is it baked into us in terms of our faith and our place in society? In other words, as a Jew, am I around with a chip on my shoulder like that older kid? As the Muslim, is there something that can be said about these relationships that are innate in each part of the birth order of either the religion and or the nature of sibling rivalry? It's a long question, but I think you'll get there. Oh, she goes. He's got a mic. We'll give you this next. What do you think, Michael?
Oh, you've got this.
He's got one on.
I just think that I can only speak personally.
Sure.
In terms of the issues of the various religions. I mean, Rabbi Sachs makes the point that each religion tries to displace the other religion. In essence, that's really what he's saying. And he talks about the fact that the identity within the religion causes a lot of issues. But it's interesting that you bring up the Old Testament, because he makes a big point in his book. There's no Old Testament. Right. There's only the Hebrew Bible.
Sure.
Okay, that's it. There's only the Hebrew Bible. So he says one thing, and then he lives out another thing. But in terms of the other thing that you mentioned about the fact that...
Sorry, I just want some of the questions. Go ahead.
Is this part of our hardwire in terms of ourselves about being Jewish? How many people that have affected our culture? I'm thinking, of course, of Freud, who wrote many things about how destructive in some ways religion was and what it represented and so forth. But he had a Jewish identity. He had a very strong Jewish identity, and certain scientists, that would consider themselves on one hand atheists, but consider themselves Jewish. I think it is very much. I think it's hardwired. I think it's very hardwired.
Well, it's an interesting thing because there are scholars that note, there are a certain group of scholars who look and take the origin of the word Hebrew to be Heberu, which means the outlaw. Not only the outsider, but the one who's the rebel. In all of these situations that you're doing, there is something radical that happens that goes to the root from the meaning of the word, and they turn things on top. And Naomi, you alluded to this because the older son was supposed to get everything, and yet you have this problem where the older shall serve the younger. How do you think that plays into this relationship between Jews, Christians, and Muslims? Take your mic.
I also wanted to say about it. You and I were together in that interfaith group, yes, in the cathedral, crosses and saints and everything all around us. And my gut response, I'm not Rabbi Sachs, was all the time alluding to the fact, the Muslims in particular, that they loved Moses and they loved Jesus and they accept, as a sign of how universal their attitude is, and they accept everybody. And I many times felt like saying, and don't ever repeat this out of this room, whoever invited you into Abraham's tent? They assumed that they were, well, I'm being negative, but I didn't like their way of assuming that they were, but they've never paid the price for it. And yet we have. And what was your question? I've skipped it. I've skipped it.
You alluded to as well that the birth order is turned upside down.
Yeah.
And there is a bit of our tradition,
right,
that is turning things on its head.
Right.
And even, our name Israel comes from that idea of struggling.
Right, wrestling.
The one who struggles both with God and man.
Man, right. I would say one of the things in all the classes that I taught, that being able to constantly turn things upside down was in a way a seed of democracy, that you can't just become a king because you're there because of a preordained thing. You have to win it. You can't, in other words, just because you're the eldest doesn't mean that you're going to be the king, that we're more democratic than that you have to earn it, you have to struggle to get there. And I would say that, well, I think that's an important point. To me, that's the seeds of democracy, that you can't just become a king automatically, but in our tradition, the younger takes over. The same thing is in the story of David the king. He's the youngest of all the brothers. He's the one that goes off to fight Goliath. They're so irritated with him for taking over. And I think it's taking ideas and turning them upside down, questioning.
It may be what I just stated, using Freud as an example, but other very well-known scientists who were atheists but also Jews, maybe they had to be the outsider to create these novel ways and revolutionize the world in terms of their culture. Whether it's Karl Marx, right, or Freud or Einstein. Einstein didn't go to temple every week. No. But I think he believed that he was Jewish.
And we learned he had a period in his life where he became ultra-Orthodox, but to get back at his parents. So one of the things that's asked here, and this is interesting, because in all this, did God show favoritism to Abel by liking his gifts better than Cain's? God's favoritism plays a vital role in the final result. And I would go on to say there's a little bit of this in that Jacob ends up getting the blessing as well, right? He ends up being the one that the line is going to be carried through. And Jacob is honored by God, we could say, and he's not the best of character.
But that's what's great about our Bible. You don't get anybody who's pure. Everybody's got their feet of clay.
They leave that to rabbis for purity.
Yeah, that's right. And we emulate them. But, and we're always, look at Bernie, if you like him or not. He's busy with revolutions and going against the billionaires and all of that. His brother, sibling rivalry, Bernie's brother is in England, ran for parliament, and he's Labour. So, there is something about that rebelliousness, about the status quo.
Well, Rabbi Sachs in the book says that he favored Abel over Cain.
Right.
And he makes a big point in the book about the difference between morality and ethics. He makes a point that morality should be part of all humanity, that we should love everybody, and God, for example, was very angry about the idea when they said the Egyptians were drowning. You know, they were his people too. So we should love all humanity first, and then ethics has to do with individual love. So there can be there is favoritism.
And you have to accept it, but work around it or deal with it.
Right.
So a number of questions here on why then, how does it that sibling rivalry results itself into religious violence?
Do you want to know?
No, that's the basis of the book,
Well,
not in
yes.
God's name. You know, that as we've become more and more individualistic, a lot of things haven't worked. We've tried nationalism,
Communism.
right? We've tried communism. We've tried enlightenment. Okay, now we're all very individualistic and so forth, and we have all this stuff and we have no meaning. So now there's a return to the groups, and once we have the groups, we have the identity, and then we have the other. There's us and them, and that's creating.
Well, he's also laying out for us that he makes the leap that from the other, that the other is the sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
You know, which he doesn't. So why does sibling rivalry seem to persist so often well into mature adulthood, even after the death of parents? Can anything be done to resolve it?
Well, let's
What hours are you using, people, Michael?
There's lots of research to show, and I don't know if it's because as we get older we lose siblings. I don't know how that actually works, and the siblings that we have we become closer to. But it's shown that a lot of, as we get older, there's more reliance on our siblings, and people have gotten closer. It seems to be that obviously as children, the siblings are very close. In adolescence, it still remains close. When people go off to college and go into their own lives and have their own children, this goes down. But apparently now there's more of a switch, it seems, as people try to become closer. I've seen a number of people in my own practice who there was tremendous alienation between them and a brother and a sister because of some really bad stuff. I'm talking about incest, physical abuse, and so forth. But it's only later on in life, it seems to be, and again, I think it has to do with the continuity and the history, that people try to reach, and sometimes it has to do with the cousins, with the people's own cousins coming together. There's more atonement, there's more forgiveness, there's more redemption in terms of getting along later on.
I want to follow it up, because in this story, what doesn't get pointed out often is that we get told that Jacob, in the middle of the night, having stole a little something from his
brother,
his uncle, and takes off with Laban's sheep and everything, and goes off. And he's worried because he's going off and he's going out. What we don't recognize often is simultaneously Esau is heading towards his brother. It's a little known fact in terms that they're both leaving to go towards each other at the very same moment. So one of the things that is that can we, what is this opportunity, what drove both of those boys towards the idea of reconciliation?
Maybe.
Go ahead, hold that up, because we want to hear you.
No. Maybe they both have arrived at a point in life where they've gotten what they wanted or yearned for, and they didn't have what's that term? Mimic? What is
mimic desire?
Yeah, when wanting what the other one has. Esau, what he needs, what he wants, he's not looking at Jacob anymore to get it for himself. Jacob has gotten what he wants, has struggled, has come to some peace, and they're ready to say goodbye with each other. That's the other, I think, so interesting. They kiss and everything, but then the wisdom that each one goes his own way. And we have a lot of that in that Bible. The story of Jethro, when he gives Moses and everybody advice about how to, he gives them advice, he tells them how to divide all the children of Israel. When he's finished, he goes back to his own tribe and lets, I love that, and lets Moses continue with his own life. Once he felt he had done, I felt a little bit in a primitive level. Once my youngest had his Brit, whatever would happen in life, I had to be there to make sure that that first stage of being inducted into the tribe was being taken care of. So everybody has what they need.
I see it
Go on.
more psychological, that maybe what happened to both of them, to Esau and to Jacob, is they had the power, they had the stuff, but there was a void, and they were trying to find meaning by coming together with their sibling. And again, I see this as in society in general, that we're searching for meaning, and as part of that meaning was the identity of being brothers, and them coming apart, which I see is so nice, and why the Bible is such a great psychological piece of literature. That's the way I see it. Is it also duplicates the whole idea of how you could maintain your relationship with your sibling. There's individuation.
Yeah.
You know, you could come together, but then you have to realize that you're apart.
But there's
You're
no
not
future.
one.
There's no future in
But
Esau and
We don't know
Jacob's.
that.
Yeah, but this
They
Bible,
may come visit on
I'm
Thanksgiving.
going to ask you then. I'm going to ask you both to comment about something that's not in Sachs' book, and I don't mean to put at a disadvantage, but we all know many of us have read The Red Tent. So immediately when we finish the story of Jacob and Esau's reconciliation, what do we have? The one daughter out of 12 sons is raped. When she is raped, the rapist comes with his father and says, I've now fallen in love with her.
I want to marry her.
And the sons of Jacob's spurned wife, Leah, the sons of Leah, and Leah who names her sons to shove it in the face of Rachel. One is Reuven. See this, look at this son. I mean, to a woman who's childless, how painful. And Shimon.
Right.
Listen here,
Right.
you hear me, you heard me, God,
Right.
whatever.
Right.
And Levi.
Right.
You know, attachment. So Jacob comes and he says, okay, if you will make a deal, the sons come and say, make a deal to these outsiders, circumcised, become like us,
You can marry.
and we'll let you marry him. They do. They acquiesce. They do. What do Shimon and Levi do? They slaughter them, decimate them, while they've been just circumcised. And Jacob, who sees in his own children the same behavior that he had when they now turn it up because they ignore the father's wishes. The father says, "How you can't do this
to me."
To me." So this violence that we see after that reconciliation in the next
Doesn't
generation.
last.
Wow.
Doesn't last.
What's your take?
It's a little bit like the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones. Very similar deal.
But also the rabbi, what's his name, Sachs says that it's not religion that causes the violence, that violence is within the human condition, and that religion is a great place to siphon it through, to express it through, but not that religion causes the violence.
So I have to ask a question in this, is that because you both have, I've sat with, when Dr. Brody years ago, when I asked him to do something for, his son was even in the class, to understand certain things about our development as adolescents, and he took from the Wonder Years all these little clips and he put together this series that went through. You just mentioned Game of Thrones and other things. Is it art in the Bible in these stories? Is it art imitating life, or is it life imitating art in this sense? I mean, what role of this? And Michael, this is
The reality is there's maybe 25 great stories, right? 25 great stories and 25 themes. Most of them come directly from the Bible. And they're just redone in different ways, in different contexts, in different ways, the way our culture sees them. But I think that at the time, maybe, when this was written by several people, it reflected the culture. You just mentioned what went on with the time of the Red Tent. This may have been the acceptable way that you dealt with issues. But as Naomi says, what you just said is the fact. It seems that, unfortunately, violence has always been part
of the human condition.
Of the human condition.
And then he also says that religion is one of the most... I thought that was so interesting. He talks a lot about the dynamics of a group, how to keep it. That religion can produce among the strongest emotional bonds for a group. He goes on and on and on about that.
Religion, just poll the audience. How many people here watch Fox News and how many watch MSNBC?
Well,
people feel very strongly about the certain groups and certain things that they identify with.
Well, he brings out the point, as we've talked about, we've gone from broadcasting to narrowcasting.
Exactly, exactly. But once the idea of monotheism was created, there was going to be trouble. Because there wasn't, again, 600 different gods that people were praying to.
But why doesn't that simplify? If there's just one God through which everything is siphoned, then you don't have to fight with other gods. This God is for everybody.
Yeah, as long as it's your God.
No, yeah, but that's what the rabbi says. He's the same God, and that the New Testament or the Old Testament, they're all part of one canon. Unfortunately, we don't live up to that potential.
All right, we're going to do two last questions. One, which has been written to me maybe by the same person 3 times, is wanting to know why Joseph, when he had the power and was the viceroy, didn't go back to visit his parent. This is obviously written by somebody here who hasn't, the kid hadn't called him. So
Not even
if you're watching out there, call your mother and father.
Obama does that.
Good. This is a question, I have it 3 times written, so any ideas or thoughts?
But why what?
Why Joseph, when he has all the power, doesn't go back to see his own father? Doesn't go back to see Jacob?
Maybe he's still very upset about what happened. You don't get rid of it so quickly.
I think it's your...
That's
He didn't
right.
have therapy.
That's right. That's
No,
right. Didn't speak it out. Didn't talk it out.
Again, I think this is what happens. Oftentimes, before I spoke here, I told the rabbi, I went upstairs to look at the plaques of my parents' names. And the thing that I think about is, I was so busy with my children during a certain part of my life and my wife, I could have paid more attention to them. I would have liked to have heard more about their backgrounds. I don't have that available now. And I think, like Joseph, he was very busy. He was taking care of the grain. He was interpreting dreams. He had a lot going on. I mean, he had a lot happening, and he may have been too involved at that time to go back.
I suffer from that all the time. Not having written enough, begging, and no, that's okay.
No, you have, because I think you talk about that in your last book, when you do that memoir, and you even said to me, very interesting in that last memoir, that you wanted to give a gift to the next generation.
Right.
And I think that that's often what happens here. I want to end with a last closing piece with Sachs writes, and I want to challenge us in some ways. He says, no less interesting in the Bible attitude to Esau and his descendants. Moses commands, do not hate an Edomite, a descendant of Esau, for he is your brother. God instructs the Israelites, and this is found in Deuteronomy. You are passing by the borders of your brother, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir. Although they fear you, be very careful not to provoke them. I will not give you even 1 foot of their land, since I have given Mount Seir as Esau's inheritance. And Sachs follows this up by saying the following. Both of you made this point brilliantly. Something of deep consequences is being intimated here. The choice of Jacob does not mean the rejection of Esau. Esau is not chosen, but neither is he rejected. He too will have his blessing, his heritage, his land. He too will have children who will become kings, who will rule and not be ruled. Not accidentally are our sympathies drawn to him, as if to say, not all are chosen for the rigorous spiritual existential of the Abrahamic covenant, but each of us has his or her place in the scheme of things. Each has his or her virtues, talents, gifts. Each is precious in the eyes of God. And I want to thank you both, because in your teachings, in your medical practice, in your doing this, you bring us up the fact that we do have free will. Sometimes in this rivalry we have to contend with the free will of others is not our will. And it creates a little bit of strife, but it also creates an opportunity. And Sachs opens up, as you have, this opportunity of what we can do with that opportunity. I thank you both.
Thank you.